Schooling. Nadia homeschools her children, but I bet not many of you have heard about radical unschooling. Not only are kids taken out of formal education, they are given complete control over their own lives, from choosing their own food to deciding on their own bedtimes. This is one radical unschooling mum speaking about what her children like to eat.
But we'd never label their food as junk food or bad food or try to discourage them from eating it because of those labels, because children can't disassociate themselves from the things that they love. So if they love McDonald's or they love chocolate or they love those things and we label them as bad or junk, then they feel like a part of them is junk or a part of them is bad.
Okay, so telling us why radical unschooling works for her, please welcome Kim Constable. Like I say, we've heard the whole thing about homeschooling, and Nadia does it, and we hear about how well that's been going. This is taking the concept to a whole different level, really, giving children complete control. There will be mums and dads up and down the country throwing their arms in the air, horror at this idea. Tell me how it works for you.
Well, basically our children just live a life of complete and utter freedom. We live by principles, we always say, rather than living by rules. It's a very traditional, sorry, it's not a traditional, it flips traditional parenting on its head, rather than how I was raised and how probably all of us were raised, which is a very kind of authoritarian way. I'm the parent, you're the child, you do as I say.
Yeah.
We don't live that way. We say, well, we live as partners. So my children I see as my friends. I treat them like I would my friends or like I would my husband. And we live in complete and utter partnership with them. They have freedom to say yes, and they have freedom to say no to anything that I suggest or anything that I want them to do. They have complete autonomy over their own lives.
How old are your kids, first of all?
They're very young. The eldest is 9, and then the second is 8, and then the 2 youngest ones are 5 and 3.
I know friends who have got children who are just coming into their teens, and they've had a very friendly, should we say, relationship with their kids, and they've tried to treat their kids as friends. It all falls to pieces once they become a teenager, and they can't assert themselves now because the boundary is blurred. Are you worried about that happening with you?
You know, I don't know. It's hard to think about what's going to happen in a few years when they're teenagers. Obviously, children go through a very strong period of growth in that, you know, obviously whenever they're younger, they're geared for communication, and that's why they ask loads of questions and they're so exuberant and excitable. But then once they hit puberty, there's something in the brain changes, and that communication moves from the frontal cortex to the back, and then they become much more insular, which is why we think about grumpy teenagers. Yeah. So I'm not sure how I will react whenever that happens. I'm not sure how I'll deal with whatever comes up. But one thing that I do know is that we have a very strong bond of communication with my kids. I mean, my eldest is only 9, but he is just the most phenomenal child. I mean, they all are, but because he's the oldest, he's kind of my benchmark. And he thinks very deeply about things, and he's very self-aware. And he'll come up and he'll say, "Mummy, I don't know if everybody thinks this way, but you know, sometimes, you know, this happens to me or that happens to me, or I feel this way about a situation or that way." And I'm sure all kids do this. I'm sure mine aren't unique. We all think our own things are fantastic.
But
we
why
do
did
have
you do that?
great communication.
What is behind this? Why did you do it?
Do you know, people generally look at me and they say, I'm not a typical unschooler. You know, I'm really not, if you like, because I think that all of us have a view in our mind of your typical unschooler, radical unschooler. They're probably a little more relaxed, you know, and I'm kind of different.
But what was your turning point?
So what happened was, I wasn't always like this, and I suppose that's where I'm coming from. I wasn't always like this. I was a very traditional authoritarian parent, and I was brought up very traditionally. I went to boarding school myself, and I started a few years ago to work on myself. And I began to, I got involved with a company in America called Executive Success Programs, and that really helped me to become more self-aware. So I began to change my viewpoint of how I was with my life. And then whenever the kids came along, I wanted to parent them in a way that was very peaceful and very humanitarian, very compassionate. But I found that really hard to do when I wasn't controlling them. I didn't want to control them. I didn't want to punish them. But it's very hard to get kids to do.
But that to me is the key. If you never discipline your children, you're going to have a relationship with them where they don't understand the boundaries, and so that you're going to have problems that, I mean, I don't have problems with my children. I don't have problems getting them to school. I don't have problems. I've taught them good manners. They know I'm their mum. And I tell them off when necessary. Now, when your children get into the big bad world, there is a society out there, and there are rules and regulations to society. Some boss is going to tell them off. How are they going to react to that? How are they going to join society like the rest of us do if they've not had that experience?
Well, there's a couple of things I would say, and the first one is it's very important to understand how a child develops and how their brain works, which is something that I'm massively interested in, and which is really why I started on this life in the first place. Before puberty, a child's brain isn't cognitive, so they don't reach cognition generally until the age of around 12 or 13. So before 12 or 13, they can't actually make sense of the world. So if something scary happens, or someone shouts at them, or someone's angry with them, they can't go, oh, you know, Jane was just having a bad day. She maybe, you know, she was late to work, you know, her viscera's up, it's okay. They can't do that. They really take it on board, and they take it very personally. But after cognition, after puberty, something in the brain happens. And although if someone is angry with them, they may still have a fight or flight reaction, they don't make it mean something that it isn't. They can logically start to process things and say, well, that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person, it just means you may be having a bad day.
Kim, can I just ask something? This all sounds really lovely in theory, but when you've got a child screaming on the floor and you're letting them eat whatever they want so they're surviving on Nutella and crisps, and you know, they're not going to school, and you sound very fortunate that your children are, you know, hugely well behaved and very balanced, but
you don't have to work. You know, people watching this will go, I can't have my kids at home all day.
But you're not saying everyone should do this. It's a lifestyle choice. Like me, I mean, I don't want anyone else necessarily to do what I'm doing, but for my children, it works. And the thing is, I haven't got the courage to do the radical unschooling because I'd get too scared of what might happen. So I'm doing home educating. But the radically unschooled children I have met have been phenomenal. I'm going to be honest, I avoid them because they're so clever. I stand there feeling so stupid and confident and bright. And I get what you're saying. I think that when children are very small, I think if you're too controlling and like with my daughters, there was too much shouting at school, it actually undermined their confidence so much. They didn't believe they could do anything. Yeah. And now that they're blossoming so much. But what I find strange is the whole thing, like bedtimes, food, all of that. How do people respond to you?
Bedtimes, you all sleep in one bed?
They think we're crazy. Yes, yes, we do all sleep in one bed. And actually, we didn't used to. Is the photo up?
That's...
Do you get any sleep? How do you get alone time with your husband?
Well, we have lots of bedrooms.
I just have to ask this question because I know people watching at home are going to be asking this. So when Mrs. Scroggins, whose kids go to school, takes them out for a week in term time to go on holiday because they can't afford to go another time, they get fined. How come you can just say my children are no longer going to school? Where's the legislation here?
Yeah, well, there is legislation, obviously. I mean, I think in England there's actually case law about homeschooling, but in Northern Ireland, where I live, there's not any case law, but there is policy.
So no one comes and does any checks?
No, but they do send out regular letters and they offer help. So the help is there if you want it. They'll offer resources. They'll offer to check your children's work. They'll offer the help if it's there.
But you're obviously
I'm just very
dealing with
confident
this intelligently. What if there's a parent who can't be bothered to get their children to school, can't really be bothered to parent at all? Can they just go, I'm not sending my kids to school anymore, they can just sit and do gaming all day?
They probably could, but I think in every single circumstance in life there is extremes. You know, we have an obligation to feed our children good food, and there's there's governing bodies to make sure that we're nourishing our children the correct way, but nobody comes into your home to check. It's just assumed that you will. And honestly, we chatted about this before the show.
Teachers see children looking emaciated and report it. So
but I'm afraid we're going to have to draw a line. We could talk about it all day. Absolutely, it's fascinating. Kim, thank you for coming in to see us. It's Kim Constable, everyone. Thank you.